Epilogue. Trent had his hands full for most of the day, listening in on the spin dock meetings, arranging for media sympathy with a few of their bought networks, and explaining the difference between HARMS, the air-to-surface missiles that the Army had used on Raccoon, and the SRAMs to the three heads of White Umbrella. Jackson, in particular, was unhappy that the larger tactical missiles hadn't been used. He didn't seem to understand that a deliberate nuclear incident within the United States had to be kept as small and contained as possible. Ironic that a man with so much wealth and power could be so oblivious to the reality he had helped create. Trent finally had a few moments to himself in the early evening after a final review of the watchdog reports. He took a cup of coffee out onto the balcony of the rooms he used when he was at the D.C. offices. The brisk of twilight was refreshing after a day of recycled air and fluorescent lights. From 20 stories up, the city below seemed unreal, sounds distant and features blurred. Gazing out at nothing in particular, Trent sipped his coffee and thought about all he'd witnessed in the past few days from the shielded privacy of his home. Umbrella's few dozen stationary remotes in Raccoon had had nothing on the satellite pirate that piped information to his private screening room. He'd been able to follow several dramas that had unfolded in the last hours of the city. There had been the rookie policeman, Kennedy, and Chris Redfield's sister. The two of them had barely escaped a lab explosion, managing to save Sherry Birkin, the young daughter of one of Umbrella's top research scientists of all people. Trent hadn't had contact with any of them, but he knew that Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield had become part of the fight. They were young, determined, and filled with a hatred for Umbrella. He couldn't have asked for better. Trent's high hopes for Carlos Oliveira had been well met, and that he had joined forces with Jill Valentine. Trent had been utterly transfixed by their escape, pleased that two of his unwitting soldiers had worked so well together, surviving in spite of Jill's infection, the lunatic Russian, and the Star Seeker. Use of the experimental tyrant-like units was still in question by many of the White Umbrella researchers, for as deadly efficient as they usually were, they were also very expensive, and Trent knew that the debates would go on, fueled by the loss of 2 units in the destruction of the city. Ada Wong, though. Trent sighed, wishing that she had survived. The tall, beautiful Asian-American agent he had sent in had been as brilliant as she was competent. He hadn't actually seen her die, but the chances that she had escaped both the lab explosion and the complete obliteration of Raccoon were slim to none. Unfortunate to say the least. Overall, though, Trent was satisfied with how things were progressing. As far as he could tell, no one in the company had the slightest inkling of who he really was or what he was doing. The 3 most powerful men in Umbrella relied on him more and more every day, completely unaware of his agenda. To destroy the organization from without and within. To devastate its leaders' lives and deliver them to justice. To organize an elite army of men and women committed to Umbrella's downfall, and to guide them as much as he was able in their quest. If his methods were complicated, the reason was simple. To avenge the death of his parents, both scientists, murdered when he was a child so that Umbrella could profit from their research. Trent smiled to himself, taking another sip from his mug. It sounded so melodramatic, so grandiose. It had been almost 30 years since his parents had been burned alive in the alleged laboratory accident. He'd left the pain behind long ago. His resolve, however, had never faltered. He'd changed his name, his background, given up any hope of ever having a normal life, and regretted nothing. Even now that he shared responsibility for the deaths of so many. It was getting dark. Far below, streetlights were flickering on, sending up a soft glow that would radiate out into the night sky like a halo above the city. In its own way, it was quite beautiful. Trent finished his coffee and absently traced the Umbrella logo on the side of the cup with his finger, thinking about darkness and light, good and evil, and the shades of gray that existed in between everything. He needed to be very careful, and not just to avoid being discovered. It was those shades of gray that worried him. After a few moments, Trent turned his back on the gathering dark and went inside. He still had a lot to do before he could go home. The end. You have been listening to Resident Evil Nemesis, written by S.D. Perry, read to you by Kookie217. I would like to thank all of my subscribers and supporters that have supported me over the past year of me reading this book. It was a great pleasure reading the book, putting in sound effects, and editing the recordings and putting it out there for you guys. I hope that you guys will support me in my future projects to come. Thank you once again, and God bless.